My name's Iain Farrell. I am the program manager at Double 11. Double 11 is a 13-year-old studio now, pretty much, and we have worked on a host of games over that time, from things like Little Big Planet and Limbo on PS Vita. We worked on some of the Pixel Junk series. We worked on Goat Simulator, bringing that to console, to Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch. We've worked on Prison Architect since 2015-16, I think, bringing that to console as well. What else? Crackdown 3 for Windows we worked on. More recently, things like Minecraft Dungeons with Microsoft Xbox Studios, and Fallout 76 with Bethesda, which has been a big project for us. And then Rust Console Edition, we partnered with Facepunch to bring that to Xbox One and PlayStation 4 just over a year ago. Yeah, so historically, we were a very technically led studio. So our founders were former programmers at places like Rockstar and Rare. And so you start with kind of what you know when you start your studio. And so we were technical partners early on. So if you needed to get something like Limbo, which is a very technically complex game running on something like the Vita, or Little Big Planet, where we got the whole Little Big Planet simulation from PlayStation 3 running on a Vita, then we were the people to go to for that. And then gradually over time, those projects expanded in scope. And so when you start to contribute to something technically, like we did with Prison Architect, where you bring that over to a different platform, getting the game running on a console is part of that. But then also you need to start to think about tailoring that experience to the platform it's going to go to. So we talked about this a lot with Prison Architect and RimWorld specifically, because they're simulation games, but whereas on PC you're very close to a screen, on a console you're naturally a bit further away. And so the need on that project was to adjust things like the user experience and the UI and the controls and things. And so that naturally led us to needing maybe some designers. And then once those designers have redesigned an experience, then you need someone to help you to maybe make that appear on the screen and work that up. So you need artists to work with those designers to create new screen elements, and maybe you need to refine the visuals a little bit for the platform. So Rust is a good example of that, where that game is very performance hungry game on PC. Yeah. So we needed to take the assets from the game and rework them to make them simpler to work better on consoles like the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And so that gradually meant that we needed artists, and then tech artists, and then different types of programmers, maybe graphics programmers, more than generalist programmers. And then we had some sound people join. So over time, we've taken on more and more of the game. And now we've moved from a situation where 13 years ago, we'd have maybe taken a game that exists over here and brought it over to another platform, to where, starting with things like Prison Architect and then with Minecraft Dungeons especially, and Rust, we create completely new content now. We either pitch that into the partner and then it becomes new content that players get to play, or in the case of Rust, actually we oversee and manage that, pitch it internally, and then deploy that stuff and bring those updates out. Our reputation probably starts with our technical capability of bringing something from a platform which is more powerful. So if you look at Rust, for example, Rust on PC recommends an i7 of a fairly recent vintage with about 20 gigabytes of RAM or something. Well, a base PlayStation 4 and a base Xbox One do not have anywhere near that, you know? So technically, that's one of the things I think we have a reputation for, and I think we do really, really well, is that we can optimize and refine and pare back your game to make it work so that it's still that game, but that it will work on these other platforms. And I think that's a real skill that we have, and that's where we kind of built our reputation. But then with our more recent work with Dungeons and with Prison Architect and Fallout, I think what we've shown is that we also are really good at coming up with new ideas for new ways to play. So there's an analogy in our industry that making a game is a bit like building a house, but before you build the house, you have to build all of the tools to make the house. And so how often happens with our partners, where they've come up with the basics of the game, they've had to build that whole thing and those fundamentals. And then I think a really useful function that we provide is that we come in as fans of the work and as fans of the genre and play with it and come up with ideas for how to extend it and expand upon it. And I think that we've really shown that we can do that really well with, just insane number of updates that came to Prison Architect over the life of that project since I think 2016. And then similarly with Dungeons, where we built a lot of those expansions in partnership with Mojang. We talked to them a lot about, well, what if there was places that you went to that were icy, or what if there were like windswept peaks and jungles, and some of those things then go on, they capture imaginations of other people, and like one of them went on to be a Lego set. So we know that we've come up with some good ideas that other people like, they ignited other people's imaginations as well. So I think we can really extend your game and expand upon it. Yeah, well, so to the first point, I guess, about like key milestones, there's been a few, and I think one of the early ones was around becoming a Sony exclusive studio, and then going through that process and deciding not to be a Sony exclusive studio anymore. I think that was, we wanted a bit more control over our own destiny, and that was, I think, a really big moment for us. But then I think it's probably motivated largely by both projects and scale. So if you look at projects like taking on something like Prison Architect, where we were able to then start to build new things for the first time and show that we could do that. That was a real turning point for us about 4 or 5 years into the life of the studio, that you get this quite big popular project that has one of the first times that I think the public were aware that this place called Double 11 were working on something, So I think that's a bit of a turning point. You start to get your badge on things, and people start to look up what that is. Yeah. Before I worked here, I played Little Big Planet on the Vita, the only Little Big Planet game I've ever actually finished. And I remember sitting in where I worked at the time in Middlesbrough, looking up who this studio Double 11 were and realizing that they were down the road. And that was an amazing thing. So I think when you get your badge on things and you start to not just be in the shadows in the background, I think that was a bit of a turning point for us. And then gradually starting to make new things. It wasn't necessarily a big kind of public moment when we worked on Crackdown 3, but internally for us it was a big deal, because that got us in front of a lot of people at Microsoft, and they started to really notice our work and really appreciated the way that we approached that project and worked with them. So that was a bit of a milestone for us, because then that, I think, opened the door probably to working with Mojang on Minecraft Dungeons. And then obviously all of these Microsoft studios, they talk to each other. And so then that opens the door for a conversation with Bethesda, which leads to working on Fallout 76. Right. And then I think those project milestones going through from sort of 2010, 11 and all the way up to probably about 2 years ago, when we decided to really commit in earnest to Kuala Lumpur. And then last May was a really nice big milestone for us, where we officially opened the studio that you'll visit in Kuala Lumpur. And that's an incredible space. That's the best studio space we've ever built. It's got wonderful facilities. The 2 weeks I spent there last year were incredible. The team are brilliant. We've got fantastic studio head out there running things, and we're really growing the team out there. So I think that was a real turning point. The first time you open another studio is big, let alone another studio in a completely different country. It's amazing. And
I guess the second part of that question was probably answered with that, I guess, because project by project, those milestones kind of go to show just how successful, just how you've successfully expanded that portfolio and those connections that you've made along the way and stuff like that.
Yeah, it does happen very organically. I think there's a sense maybe outside of the industry that these things happen in a more structured way, and definitely when you work with larger partners, a process of going, responding to a proposal or a pitch or whatever is a formal process for sure. But the conversation starts, it's all very people based, and everyone in our industry, I think, when it comes down to it, whoever you're working for and whoever you're making games for, if you go to an event like GDC or Develop in the UK or E3 as it was back in the day, everybody talks to one another. You'd be walking the show floor at E3 and there's Shigeru Miyamoto playing a Sony game. Right now, we're all lovers of the craft and lovers of the thing, like fundamentally. And so people do talk to one another. It is very much based on relationships. And then obviously there's a due diligence and formal process to it. But I think it always starts with a conversation. And usually that conversation is a bit ad hoc, or it's someone going, someone's saying to someone else, oh, we've got a problem with this. And they go, well, I know someone you could talk to about that, and then it goes from there. So it's like a lot of business, it's a very organic and people-led process. We've been fairly fortunate, I think. on one aspect of this where globally English has become a very universal language. It's very widely spoken and very widely understood, which does make, as native English speakers, does make our job a little bit easier of going internationally, because usually you encounter people, whether we're working with teams in Sweden or whether we're working in teams in Asia, in like Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia, for example, they tend to have pretty good English on the team. So the way that we kind of approach that, for one, is to try and understand initially what their challenge is and what they're trying to overcome, and we try and embed ourselves as closely as possible within that team. So whether we're using tools like Slack or Teams or even WhatsApp and things like that, whatever the preferred communication tool is, I think if you go back sort of 10-15 years, it was probably more common that you would sign a contract to do some work and it would be a bit of a black box, and you would work on something for a period of time, and then you would kind of go somewhere and you would present it, and there'd be a bit of a scary meeting and be like, did they like it, or is it working, or the builds crashed? It'd be that horror story of something going wrong at an E3 booth or whatever that you've probably heard kind of in various parts of the industry. And then I think since then, we were choosing to work differently with partners pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, it's become in some ways easier because everyone has gone through that experience of being remote. And so communication like this is much more common. Everyone is a bit more used to it, but we try and integrate our systems with partners as much as possible. So we try to be using a shared version of things like Jira for tracking tasks and things like that. And so working in the same way with them. So whether it's Jira or Azure, like ADO, which we use with some partners, or even just sort of more basic things like sharing Google Docs and sharing documents, live documents that you can work on together, whether it's Google or Office 365. So we try and use common tools to kind of help with that sort of stuff. And then really it's about having good structured regular check-ins in place. So regular meetings, regular catch-ups and check-ins, making sure that people know what they're working on, making sure that it's visible to everyone. So the KL team, when they come online before we wake up, for example, in the UK, we'll be posting stuff on Teams and Slack on those various projects and telling us where they're up to and what they're doing. They'll do their daily stand-ups at the beginning of their day, and then we'll have check-ins with them when we come online in the morning, which is your afternoon. And it's the consistency of touch points, I think, is very important, to make sure that people are on track and that we're talking about progress all of the time. And then more like bigger picture zoomed out, then it's about leads on teams meeting regularly to check they're happy with progress and to resolve issues, if they don't think something's working quite right. When we opened, I was asked by a journalist whether or not I was jealous, or the team in the UK was jealous of the studio. And I said, well, I won't speak for them, but I am. It's great. So yeah, we've got great facilities there. The sort of area we focused very heavily actually with that new studio on making sure there were spaces for people to meet and spend time talking to each other, and that was a really conscious choice rather than have those spaces devoted to development. So there's places to hang out and sort of spend time with each other and talk, and then there's also the really good dedicated development areas. There's a dedicated area for playtesting, screening room at the back. It's fantastic. One thing that struck us was, and Mark and I were quite emotional first time we visited, the fact that it felt so much like here. It's bizarre that thousands of miles apart, but it really has that vibe as well. It's lovely.
Do you guys have the intention of making that studio feel almost like, the UK studio? And did you guys have the intention of making it feel almost like home, where, it's thousands of miles away and yet somehow it still feels like you never left, in a sense?
Yeah, so that's a tricky thing, because I think it came about from the effort that the team put into recruiting members of the team to run it for us. We found some people who felt like they understood what we were aiming for, and they felt like part of the team, and they very quickly felt like part of the Double 11 sort of wider family. But then the other thing, I guess, was in the design. I think, Mark, our COO, was very, very closely involved, was quite meticulous in the things that he wanted in the space and the way that he wanted to build it. And those are the kind of same thought processes that have gone into making here. So I don't think we had it as a bullet point, at any point that these are the success criteria. It has to feel like the same space. But it happens that because a lot of the same people were involved, it was sort of imbued with the same energy and warmth, I guess. And when we arrived and we met some members of the team, and they felt like they would fit right in the UK studio as well if we just happened to meet them in Middlesbrough and hire them here. So I think it's like the principles and values approach that we talked about earlier in a couple of spots. I think if you set a direction based on principles and based on things that matter to you, then people take decisions that support those things. And that does two things. It means that you get consistency, but you also get their take on that, and then they move it on as well. And then the culture is not just yours. It's not just a list of things. It becomes owned, and then people carry that forward themselves. So I think that's why it felt so similar when we arrived. I think as I get older and more free highlights, my thinking generally is that every problem on a project comes down to communication. Someone didn't know something that they needed to know, or didn't have enough of the context to make the right decision. And so I think I try and guide our project teams to run things in terms of principles over process. And so what I mean by that is that everyone on the team understands where they're going and understands why they're doing something and what the objective is, because then they can make the right decision rather than something being a bottleneck around a certain individual. I think, there's no right or wrong sort of obvious way to run a project, but I think when you're running things at the size and the scale that we're running projects at, with teams to sort of 60 to 100 people, and you're collaborating with more potentially on the partner side, I think it's really important that everyone at least knows what the North Star is and knows where they're going towards to kind of overcome challenges and try and solve their own problem. Ideally, what you want to be doing is training people to come to you with, I've encountered this problem, this is the thing I'm going to try and do to overcome it. Because the nature of the challenge you face per project can be slightly different, but the way of kind of overcoming it is usually the same, which is getting together as a group and discussing the details and kind of like working out what next steps are. I mean, quite often we encounter a lot of our issues are around technical performance issues. It's very hard to make a game that runs both really, really well on an Xbox Series X, but also on a Switch. The performance and memory and, all the technical implications of getting that game to run. And we have done it, right? And we've worked really well with partners to do that. But the wins to get it running on a much lower end machine without compromising the experience of someone on a higher end machine, that's quite a difficult technical challenge to overcome, and they're usually what we encounter. We also will get things that just come up, we have an unannounced project right now which is nearly ready to kind of go into certification, and last minute some new stuff has come up, and it's just going to require a ton of extra work to be done, and nobody knew it was there, and it's just completely new, and sometimes that just happens. So I think it always comes down to sitting down as a group and working out what you need to do, and that's where that being embedded with that partner and behaving like you're part of their team is so important. We've prided ourselves on trying to work the way other people work and trying to understand their team and integrate into it so that we feel like an extension of their team. I think otherwise this doesn't really work. Yeah, well, we do. So we put support on the technical aspects with our project. So if you look at the games that we've published in the past, we've supported technically. So maybe bringing it to other platforms. Songbringer is a good example. Recently, where we brought that game to Switch and iOS when it was a PC game originally that Nathaniel was developing. But we also support with marketing. Helping to manage your community. So if I look at Rust as a really big example of that, where we published that game on console in partnership with Facepunch, and we've ported the game over. We run it and maintain it and patch it and update it and all those good things. But we also liaise with the platform holders to do marketing for both of those and work with Sony and Microsoft to get things promoted and free play weekends and all that sort of stuff. And then we also make sure that we're thinking about content and taking feedback from the community. So we have dedicated members of the team who are on Discord and looking at social media and just paying attention to kind of maybe pain points or requests from the community. And so we manage all of that aspect as well and gather that data, review it internally, publish regular updates to keep the community informed as to what's coming, and try and respond to problems when they arise. And then we build that roadmap of new skins and new content and make trailers and all of that good stuff. So it's everything that goes into publishing that game. Working with people to get a boxed physical copy out there and special editions if that's something that we're doing. It's the whole stack. So we will probably come back to our values when we're talking to people around integrity, ambition, and humanity. they do mean something to us. They're actually on the wall above me, and I think that's important. We'll refer back to those for sure. But in terms of the skill sets, I think it's worth talking about the fact that you don't necessarily have to have come from games. So increasingly, because we're a full service studio, and because we have a lot of functions within the business that aren't just game making functions. So we've really expanded our people and culture team, for example, in the last couple of years. So we brought on people for our L&D team, for example, to help train and develop members of the team. Sarah, who leads that team, came from a completely different background to games. She was working, I think, at Mitsubishi Heavy Industries when she joined us, but was really excited about our challenge as a business. And it's fairly unusual for a studio of our size to invest in that sort of function. So finding someone from in-games would have potentially been harder to find anyway, because not every studio does this. So that's one example. Our recruiters came from outside the industry. I had been in the industry 20 years ago as a journalist and got scared and got a proper job, and then came back having learned that I shouldn't have got scared, shouldn't have got a proper job. So I think we look around for people with the skills that we need. As we're building out our infrastructure capability internally, that's a lot of traditionally kind of web-based technologies with servers and dealing with the back end there. Those people can come from other tech disciplines. They don't have to have come from games. We'd love it if they have an interest in games and they're excited about it, because we are too, but it's not necessarily a requirement. I think we look, in terms of what we look for in a person, it's like if you're enthusiastic and capable and want to learn, then I think those things probably trump, if you've been in the industry 15 years and maybe, that could trump it, because you actually have, if you're really, really enthusiastic and you're going to build that team and bring it forward, you've got to also want to come in as a team player, and want to contribute and develop with everyone. This game development now in 2023, I think more than at any point in history even, is a team sport. And the teams are getting larger and larger as games get larger and larger. So whereas years ago, we'd have taken on one project and maybe a small team that we would hire in would own that project in its entirety. Well, that's kind of becoming less common. Like, you have to work really well with people outside. So you have to be a great communicator, you have to be a great collaborator, you have to be a problem solver. And those skills are not only found in games. They're found all over the place. So I think we would look for the person that we think is going to move the team and the function forward. And I personally, when I'm interviewing, I look to be surprised and delighted by the person that I'm talking to and excited to work with them, as much as the experience they have and what they've done in the past. Yeah, well, I mean, whether they come from games or not, everyone is going to need to learn and develop and grow their skill set over time. Technologies change, the tools to make games change all the time. So we're going to have to provide development and support opportunities for everyone. And so that's why in 2020, we hired in Sarah, who heads up our learning and development team internally. And she now has a team of 3. And they support our managers of different disciplines, working with them to understand what people's needs are. So everyone then has a kind of skills matrix that you can follow along. So very common in businesses to have like a different pathways of different disciplines. So whether you're in code or whether you're in art or design or whatever, there's a development pathway to follow. And you'll work with your manager at the beginning of the year to look at kind of where you are, and you'll talk about the skills that you want to develop, because there'll be nuance within that. So in art, say, whether you're going to be maybe a tech artist and lean a little bit into code and you'll be able to do a bit of that, or whether you're a pure artist or a concept artist or whatever you do. And then where there's gaps, we work with the learning and development team to work out what kind of training you might need. So maybe you need some mentorship. Maybe we need to find you someone either else within the studio who's a bit further along in their journey and they can help bring you along and do some training with you. Or maybe it's a course that you go on, or maybe it's a type of project actually that we try and assign you because you've just not worked on, maybe you've worked on Unity projects and you want to work on an Unreal project. It's those kinds of things. So we tailor that for everyone in the business to kind of make sure they're always making progress and make sure they're getting better all the time and able to be ready for whatever the next project is. Sure, that you can talk about is the unfortunate, difficult sentence on the end of in any conversation about video games.
Yeah.
So our aspiration, I think, we always take a long-term view. is the first thing to say, because you mentioned, like, the horizon. We try and look far out all the time and try to be planning for sort of 10 years from now. And Lee, the founder, still gives us the remit often to think about ourselves as a much bigger studio. So where we're 370 people right now, ish, and he encourages us to think of ourselves as a 500-person studio or a bigger studio when we're thinking about initiatives and planning, because what we've learned from our experience with projects over the years is that every partner we take on wants to do more with us. So we, whereas team sizes maybe 5-6 years ago would have been sort of 10, 20 people, now we're looking at 60 to 100 people in some cases for projects. So that's one way that we're trying to look ahead and think about that and think about kind of where we're going next. In terms of exciting things that are happening, well, we've got a bunch of unannounced stuff which will be really exciting. When I can talk about that, like, we should pick up the phone again and say hello. It's very good. But we've just had some stuff come out in Fallout 76 that we helped work on with the Blue Moon update. That was really exciting. So we're continuing to work with Bethesda on Fallout, which is really cool, and they've been a great partner because that's a released game, so it's lovely to be able to talk about that one and to get people excited and bring people in from the community to talk about that. We've just sunset Prison Architect, which was bittersweet because we've been working on that for a long time, and Paradox just announced that that's coming to an end. So that's kind of the end of a journey, which is like a big kind of like deep breath moment, because we always talk about starting projects, but often you don't think about things kind of ending in that way. It's sort of like but we had a really big year. We brought out Ideology is announced for RimWorld on console, which is really good, and Rust continues to go from strength to strength. The Cultivator update I think we just announced, which is if not out, coming soon. Rust continues to get great feedback from players on console. It's really, really good. So it's given me trust issues, but it's a fantastic game. We feel that one of the things that sets us apart is our very people-first approach. So we're a very people-led studio in that way. It's a very organic thing. We will be really transparent with the team here and with partners about where we are on the project, and we will avoid crunch, we will avoid overworking people and burning them out. We value family time as much as project time. We think that having a healthy work-life balance is really important. That's why Lee bothered to found the studio. He'd worked at these larger studios and felt like there was a kinder way to do it, and that was what he wanted to do. And I think we've stood by that. I think we've demonstrated that we really mean it. We try and really look after the people that we have and not just pay lip service to things. We try really hard to support them in their development and develop games in a really honest and fair way. That's what we're trying to do. So I think it's not black and white, but that's what we're aiming to be. And I think we do stand out in that way, and that's why we're independent, and that's why we value that quite highly as well, is that we can be in control of how we manage our teams and how we do things. I think if you become part of something bigger, sometimes. So I think if there is that one thing, it is that we are people first and people focused, because without people doing this great work, then you don't get the video games at the end of it. Is it like we keep saying over again, this is a team sport. You can't do it on your own.
All right, thank you for your time, Iain. I appreciate it. It's
all right.
Great to see your perspective, and obviously seeing Double 11 expand its reach over into Malaysia, opening up a studio. And I definitely look forward to seeing what you guys, with you saying that it's the best studio you guys have made. I'm looking forward to go seeing it tomorrow.